Hello, everyone, and welcome to Life After the Military, a show completely focused on veterans transitioning from military to civilian life. Our show is powered by Pivotal Moments, a nonprofit on a mission to strengthen mental fitness for all. Go check them out at pivotalmoments.org to learn more. My name is Lee Elias, and I'm joined, as always, by my good friend and co-host, Howie Cohen, and we are privileged today to have Steve Sosland with us. Steve is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point and served as an infantry officer for about 11 years. He served in several infantry assignments, including a tour with the 1st Ranger Battalion located at Hunter Army Airfield in Georgia. Steve is now the Chief People Officer for the Texas Tech University system, where he has a major impact in developing and sustaining a high-performing culture. Post-military, Steve spent 13 years as a recruiter for Cameron Brooks. He also gained extensive experience in the medical field as he worked with Hill County Memorial Hospital in Fredericksburg, Texas, and 2 health science centers that include the University of North Texas and Texas Tech University. Steve, big welcome to the show. Thanks for joining us on Life After the Military.
Terrific. Thanks, Lee. I appreciate the gracious introduction, and I'm excited to have this conversation today. Thanks for bringing me in with an old friend, Howie Cohen, and I'm looking forward to the
Yeah, this is going to be a lot of fun, Steve. I told you I couldn't wait for this episode, man.
Sure.
I'm looking forward to it too. As I said off the air a few minutes ago, Howie's kind of a mentor to me, and you're a mentor to him. So this should be fun all the way around, whether we make fun of each other or we just learn from each other. Either way, the audience is going to win. So Steve, I'm going to jump into our first question.
Sure, you bet.
As I said in the intro, you served in the U.S. Army for 11 years, from 1980 to 1991. You had multiple assignments that included serving, as we said, in the 75th Ranger Regiment as a young officer in the 1st Ranger Battalion. Just share with us what you did in the Army, how that experience molded you, shaped you, and obviously we love any type of story that you have that's memorable from that experience.
Terrific. And so I'm going to get to the story for you, Lee. I want to address something, and that is that I would encourage your listeners, if they've not already done so, to go back to the session of Crossing the LD that the two of you did together when you actually interviewed Howie, because Howie captures his experience in 3rd Ranger Battalion, and he talks about working for a phenomenal battalion commander, and he talks about the 3 things that I think are true about all of the battalions within 75th Ranger Regiment, and that is to work with people who are incredibly disciplined individuals, disciplined units, who set the bar very high on high standards, and it's probably the epitome of personal and team accountability.
Right.
And those things are really critical. But having said that, I'm going to tell you that when I talk about my military experience, I would say that's what everybody wants to go to when they look at my resume. Even now at Texas Tech, in the Texas Tech University system, when our chancellor who runs the system introduces me in a group of people, he wants to point out that I was an Army Ranger, and he doesn't know anything else other than what the image of Army Rangers have been over the years, and especially in Iraq and Afghanistan, and those phenomenal soldiers in the Ranger Battalion who epitomize those 3 things that Howie talked about. My experience was a bit different. The battalion commander that I had during my years in the Ranger Battalion was probably one who his ego is what led the way. And I'll tell you a story about the Ranger Battalion, but then I want to go back and tell you about another leader. So today, if we can, I'll talk about stories of leaders, but it's for a purpose for the audience. And that is that if somebody's looking at going to any organization, their next assignment in the military or a civilian assignment later, I think it's really important to look at the senior leader and to spend time looking at who that person is and what kind of operation are they leading? How do they treat their people, and what do they do with that? So here's a story. I was the logistics officer, S4 for those in the Army, in the 1st Ranger Battalion based in Savannah, Georgia. And we spent time, like all Ranger Battalions do, deploying to worldwide assignments. We had a geographic region we were responsible for. And so as we were preparing to go on a deployment, our battalion commander said, and I'm going to date myself with this, he said, "Hey, listen, I know we've got these new satellite radios that I've read about. I want to get satellite radios for us. I know Delta Force has them. We want to get them for the Ranger Battalion." And I said, well, sir, we can do that. I said, what problem are you trying to solve? And he said, well, every time we deploy, I can't stay in contact with my company commanders. They just don't report on a timely basis. We need to have communication that will help us do that. And I said, sir, I'm happy to get you those, those satellite phones and satellite radios, and we can do all that. But I don't think that's the problem. He said, all right, Sosland, what's the problem? I said, they don't trust you. I said, they're not going to communicate with you because they don't think you have their back, and you ream them every time they give you bad news. So if something tough is going on, you're not going to hear it until they've resolved the issue. Then they'll give you the sit rep. And he said, Sosland, did you hear what I said? Get the damn radios. So I did. And we had a lot of fun implementing and putting those radios in place, but we still never solved the communications problem. Communication is a partnership between individuals, and it's two-way communication based on trust if it's going to be effective. And so I think there's more fundamental things than that. The time in the Ranger Battalion was phenomenal, but it was because I worked with some really incredible soldiers, best I've ever seen. Some of the small units within the battalion were some of the best that I've ever seen. But Lee, on your LinkedIn site, you give I think a bit of your personal, maybe this is, in fact, I'd love to hear if this is your purpose statement or what you did, but you talked about that bonded teams, as I recall, right? Bonded teams will always be a group of individuals. And to be able to create that bonded team is an art. Why did you write that?
That's a great question. And I'm flattered that you looked on my LinkedIn page, to be perfectly honest with you. It's good news too. Look, here's the belief I have. This actually goes back to the 1980 Miracle on Ice team. Okay. Yeah, so I've been heavily involved in sports my whole life. And I actually
watched it live and know where I was when I watched that game. You weren't old enough to do that.
I definitely was not old enough. I can tell you that. But I'm envious of you. This is what I'll tell you, how that impacted me. All right. The first time I really came into that team, believe it or not, was at the turn of the century. HBO did a documentary called Do You Believe in Miracles? All right, again, a little bit of a story here. And I was a young hockey player at the time, in my teens. And my father said, you need to sit down and watch this. Right. And I watched that documentary and I saw what Herb Brooks did with that team. And it made complete sense to me immediately. I mean, immediately. There was no learning curve. I just understood how he bonded that team, how they were able to overcome all issues, communication, interpersonal issues, and everything to commit to a common goal and accomplish an impossible goal, which they obviously did. For anybody who doesn't know what I'm talking about, just go watch the movie Miracle. That will explain everything. All right. It wasn't until I got older and I was coaching hockey myself that I started to realize that not only did people not understand what Herb Brooks did, they almost were missing the point. I mean, I've heard people say, well, that team got lucky or the Russians were sleeping. Yeah. And at that moment, and Howie, I don't even know if you've heard this story. That was the moment I realized I needed to dedicate my life, I mean that, to building bonded teams because miracles can happen. And I've done that so many times with sports teams. I mean, together, it's not just me, obviously. I can't make this work on my own. But what I found is that a group of individuals that come together, when they have an identity, a common goal, they obviously have extreme trust built, there's almost nothing you can't accomplish. And I always say in my line of work, like we create little miracles every day. When we do that. And again, look, it's hard to get a team to buy into something. And this is not just sports. This is any team, right? One of the reasons I revere the military so much is because, I mean, that's part of the mission is to accomplish a goal together. The military is the best team on the planet, right? So when I wrote that and I speak about that, it's not just something that I believe in tactically. I mean, it's in my soul. It's the core of my being is that bonded teams, a group of people coming together to accomplish a common goal, is not only rare, all right, but it is maybe one of the greatest things in life, right? So when you're talking about with your military experience, especially what you said about the person not even listening about trust, which is the foundation of everything, right? Howie will tell you this, trust is where I start everything. If you don't have that, there's really no point. That speaks to me. And again, one of the reasons I wanted to do this show, one of the reasons that I wanted to get involved with this group is because it enables that mission that I have of bringing people together to accomplish common goals.
So is that your personal mission statement? Is that your purpose statement? What do you?
My purpose statement is that I want the world to believe in the power of teamwork, and I want to inspire them to do that.
Great. Well, one of the things you and Howie have in common, obviously, is coaching hockey.
Yeah, that's right.
So
that's right. I got the hockey nose. He doesn't have the
Yeah.
hockey nose yet. This was not broken like this when I was born, but I'll let him. He has the hair, so it's a good trade-off.
I've got rugby ears and shins, so I get it. So we'll get back to my story, but Howie, how about your personal purpose statement? Why are you here?
Yeah. So listen, Steve, we're just going to make you a co-host of this podcast, man. You know? That is a great question, and I've actually put quite a bit of thought to that. I believe that I was put on this earth to help people be the best they could be, to whether it's to help them be the best leader they could be, whatever they choose to do. I feel like I have a mission to help them be the best they can be, and whatever capacity I could do that. So if I'm coaching a hockey team and it's a youth hockey team, in most cases, the age group is 11 to 12 or 13 to 14. To me, it's much more than coaching a hockey team. It's instilling in these young men or these boys, to some degree, they're boys, instilling in them the values and the tactics and the tools and the skills to grow into being productive young men, right? And to me, hockey is the conduit to make that happen. And so that, to me, that's a metaphor for everything I do, right? When I was in the military, once I got to a certain point in my career, I realized that I now had to give back. People had invested in me to get me where I was at that point in my career. And I knew that whenever I went to an organization, my goal was to leave it better than when I got there. My goal was to develop and create, high performing, effective leaders around me who could then go on and do great things in other organizations, right? And again, that's a metaphor for everything I try to do in my life, right? So that's kind of my mission statement, or my purpose, and why I think I was put on this earth.
So I think for anybody watching this episode, they can see the symbiotic relationship between the two of you. So Howie wanting to develop individuals to maximize their effectiveness, Lee, you wanting to bring those individuals together for a bonded team and being able to do whatever you can to do that. And where the team is greater than the sum of the individuals, it just seems that that's why you all work so well together. I'll tell you a story.
Steve, I think you should have sent the questions to us, man.
All right, let me tell you a story. So, and this will sum up the military, and then if you would like, I can transition this to other things I've done in my life. The summer of 1976 was a hot, humid summer in upstate New York, probably in Pennsylvania as well, but you wouldn't remember this.
Was this Fort Drum, Steve?
This was actually West Point.
Oh, okay.
It was my first summer as a new cadet at West Point. And similar, not as intense, similar to Ranger School, the experience of Beast Barracks the first summer at West Point is designed to put pressure on these, high school kids who just literally are 2 months out of high school, and get them in their first leadership position and help them transition from civilians to military. And so I was doing that. We would rotate leadership assignments. And I had just killed my platoon. And I did something really stupid, and my platoon was killed in a training exercise. And the officer that's in charge of a company of cadets for our tactical discipline and military training, called a tactical officer, was a guy named Major Herbert Jack Lloyd, out of
Jesus.
Hope, Arkansas.
Are you kidding me?
Herb Lloyd was a legend. He was the highest decorated soldier out of Vietnam who did not receive the Medal of Honor. He had everything else. His medals went under his lapel, but that was not, he wasn't defined by his medals. He was defined by the stories and the people that he influenced. And anyone that ever knew him was positively influenced by Herb Lloyd. I was blessed to be able to be a cadet in this platoon, but this particular day in July of 76, I did not feel blessed. He came up to me and he said, "Mr. Sosland," in his Hope, Arkansas accent, "what happened here?" And I immediately blamed it on another cadet who, if they had just done what they were supposed to, we would have been fine. He said, "Mr. Sosland, after dinner tonight, I want you to post to my office, and I want you to be there sharp in your dress uniform, and I will see you at 1900 hours." So I go back, very nervous, no air conditioning in our barracks. His office was in the basement, so no chance of any breeze or anything else. And I sweated through my dress uniform and I was soaking wet, but I did exactly what I was supposed to do. I knocked twice on his door. He said, "Enter." I walked in. I stood in front of his desk. I saluted and I said, "Cadet Sosland reporting his order." And he said, "Mr. Sosland, when you make a mistake, I expect that you will knock on my door, you will post, you will give a sharp salute, you will say, 'Sir, I flat ass fucked it up,' and I'll take my hit." That was my first lesson of leadership and responsibility and accountability. And it came from a man that, as I later learned, growing up Baptist, I never heard him curse a word in his entire life after that. And he was my mentor for 37 years. The only time I ever heard him ever use a word was then. So let me fast forward 4 years later. I'm a brand new second lieutenant in a mechanized infantry battalion in Fort Polk, Louisiana, which at that time was home of the 5th Mechanized Infantry Division. I was in the 3rd Battalion, 11th Infantry Regiment. I was the mortar platoon leader, and our battalion commander drives up, jumps out of his Jeep, runs over to one of my sergeants and says, "Sergeant Fair, what happened here?" And he said, "Sir, if I had just done what I knew we were supposed to do instead of letting one of my soldiers do it, we would have been okay." And the battalion commander's response was, he found me and he said, "Lieutenant Sosland, I want you and Sergeant Fair to post to my office at 0600 tomorrow morning, and I want to talk about this incident." So Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Jack Lloyd was now the battalion commander of the battalion where I was in Fort Polk, Louisiana. So I said, "Sergeant Fair, here's what you're going to do. You're going to knock twice on his door. You're going to post right in front of his office. You're going to salute. You're going to say, 'Sir, I flat ass fucked it up and I'll take my hit.'" Sergeant Fair had never cursed in his life. And he said, "Sir, I can't do that. My mother wouldn't let me." I said, "Sergeant Fair, do exactly what I said." So he does exactly that. Sergeant Ed Fair knocks on the door. He walks in, says the first curse word he ever said in his life. I'm standing one step behind and one step to the left of Sergeant Fair. He says exactly what I told him to say. Herb Lloyd does this real quick look at me, then comes around in front of his desk. He leans in to Sergeant Fair and he does something I've never seen before or since. He pulls his hand up, and Herb Lloyd slaps his own face so hard that it left a handprint on there. Sergeant Fair fell down. Colonel Lloyd hit his own face, and Fair falls down. I pick him back up. I don't know what to think about this. And Herb Lloyd said, "Sergeant Fair, if you'd done that in combat, you would have gotten our soldiers killed." He then rips off his sergeant stripes off of his sleeve. And he says, "I'm going to demote you. And this is never going to happen again." Now, then, and this is what made Herb Lloyd such a great leader. He spent 45 minutes talking about Ed Fair, talking about his family, talking about his mother, talking about his kids, talking about his wife, talking about his siblings that he knew. He knew his soldiers in his battalion so well, 1,200 soldiers. He knew them that well that he could talk about them. He said, "What would they think of you?" He said, "I'll tell you what they're going to think of you. They're going to think you're the greatest person in the world because you are going to be a great first sergeant, you're going to be, and if you want to be an officer, I'm going to be there to make sure that you can go to OCS and become an officer. He said, you're one of the greatest leaders I've ever known. He builds this guy up to the point that he, on the way out, Ed Fair's thanking him and saying, sir, thank you. I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. And we walk out the door. Mr. Sosland, stay in here. Lieutenant Sosland, stay in here. He got in, he said, his career is in your hands. Whatever happens to Ed Fair is going to be your responsibility. So I'm very proud to say, fast forward 4 years, and I was very proud to be part of Ed Fair when he commissioned as a second lieutenant in the infantry at Fort Benning, Georgia. Great leaders know their people. Great leaders see what the capability is. They have a strict code of accountability. They set the example, as in your interview with Howie and the battalion and the commander of the 3rd Battalion, 3rd Range in 75th Ranger Regiment at the time that Howie was there. And they set that example and they hold those high standards. And that applies in any well-bonded team that will beat any group of individuals.
You know, Steve, I love this story.
Go ahead, Lee, I'm sorry.
No worries. I'll tell you a couple quick notes on that, and I'll let Howie jump in. What I love about it is this, everyone, I know in team building talks about accountability, and it's insanely important. When I work with a coach or a leader, there's 2 questions I always ask them before any other question, right? They always want to rush to the accountability point because they know accountability kind of makes the result. And I'll ask the coach 2 questions. First question is, can you define the word trust without using the word trust in the definition? Some people are better at it than others, but I've never had anybody come back with like, this is what trust is, right? It's not something you think about a lot. Then the second thing I ask them, and you just affirm this, is, do you know what motivates every single athlete or person underneath you? And I've yet to have someone say yes. And I follow that up with this question. Well, then how the hell are you motivating them? And that's when the room goes silent. And this man knew that, right? I love that he knocked him down and brought him up, and he understood that, this is bigger than just something on your arm. It's bigger than just you and me. I want to know who you are. I want to know what makes you tick, and I want to know why you are who you are, which is exactly what you're doing on this interview to Howie and I too, which is awesome, right? But I love that story. And I am going to practice slapping myself in the face now and seeing if I can get someone to fall down, because that is incredible. Let that not be the only takeaway from the story, obviously, but that's incredible. Go ahead, Howie. I apologize.
Yeah, Steve, I'm sure you had probably told me in the past that you had worked with, and I knew him as Brigadier General Herbert Lloyd. You probably had shared with me before, and I'd just forgotten, but we could do a whole podcast. I mean, we could do 10 podcasts on General Lloyd. I had the privilege to work with him. I'm not going to tell stories about him. We could say that for another time, but I had the privilege to be in the 2nd Infantry Division, the XO of the 122nd Signal Battalion, the Divisional Signal Battalion for 2nd Infantry Division, where General Lloyd was the Assistant Division Commander for Maneuver and Support for a period of time. And I caught him for just a few months before he PCS'd on to another assignment. But I will tell you, in that short, I think it was 2 or 3 months, the impact he made on me was immeasurable. That man, and I'll tell you something else about Lloyd. To my knowledge, he was the only Sergeant First Class who received a battlefield promotion to captain in combat, and that was in Vietnam. And that just tells you the quality of the man and the leader that he was. What a privilege it was to even spend just 3 months with him, and the fact that you had time with him as a major and as when he was a battalion commander is special. But hey, so listen, let me just continue on, Steve, because like I said, we could spend the whole podcast on General Lloyd. But so what I want to transition then, Steve, is to your post-military career. I find it absolutely fascinating. And that's where I met you in your post-military career. You worked for 4 years as an area manager for PepsiCo. You're part of the KFC Management Corporation. Then you were a general manager for the Cosmel's division of Brinker International for a little over 2 years. You worked as a recruiter for Cameron Brooks, and for any officers who are listening, you're probably familiar, or you probably had some interactions with Cameron Brooks at some point, because they work incessantly to recruit officers out of the military into corporate America. You did that for 13 years. So what I would love for you to share with our audience is just tell us about your experiences in these positions. Describe the challenges you had as you transitioned into these organizations. What went well, what didn't go well, and really, I think it's an opportunity for you to educate our audience, our listening members, the men and women in uniform, of what you look for as a recruiter and how you can arm them with the tools and capabilities to really represent them very well as they interview for jobs post-military. I think that would be a tremendous value to our listening audience.
Well, Howie, that's a lot to unpack, and I will do that. And Lee, if you'll let me know if I'm talking too long, just hold up your hand or something, and
I'm not. If you're telling a great story, I'm not stopping you. I can tell you that right now.
So I think we ought to go back to the beginning of when I transitioned, and what was the biggest challenge that I faced, and it was really simple. It was tripping over my own ego. So while the military does some great things, ego protects us. And for those of us that were in the infantry or in special operations, but I think for any, frankly, especially now the way wars are fought, for logistics officers, for anybody, right? Ego protects us because ego is what allows us to do the things that are irrational. Follow me, and then go take people into danger. When we do that, that's an irrational move that most people would not do. We instinctively stay away from danger. We don't go into that. And so there are those people, the first responders, those in the military. There are others who move towards danger, but most people won't. So with that as an instinct, in ego being the thing that protects us, hey, I can do that. Then if we bring that out into the civilian world without having thought about it, without being self-aware and self-reflective on what does that mean, how do I manage that, then I think we have our challenge. I fortunately have Kelly. I'm Kelly's husband. Kelly is the biggest force of helping keep my ego in check. And this has been a developmental goal of mine. I mean, specifically, I wrote down a goal to keep my ego in check. But Kelly still finds that I'm not doing so well.
I think the three of us have that in common with our wives. I'm just going to throw that out there right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. But I think it's important because I actually came through a recruiting firm that helped me make the transition. And it was the same one I later worked for, Cameron Brooks. And Roger Cameron, who was at that time, he and his wife, Renee Brooks Cameron, were the owners of the firm. And so they helped me, and they gave me the opportunity to interview. I interviewed with several companies, I think 11 companies, and I had multiple offers. And one was for an engineering position in Pennsylvania, actually in Philadelphia. One was a technical sales position in North Carolina. And there might have been some others, but and that was with a company that did linings for turbine engines for airplanes. So technical. I had an engineering degree. It made sense. I had an engineering degree and MBA. It kind of made sense to look at that. Then I interviewed with PepsiCo, not PepsiCo. I interviewed with Kentucky Fried Chicken. So we can label this any way you want. But the KFC management division of Pepsi ran the Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants. And what that really ended up being when I went through the interview was this was a pure leadership job. This was leading teams of people who, when we looked at the frontline team members, these were either chronically underemployed or often unemployed, and they were minimum wage workers. And you all know, anybody who's ever been to a fast food restaurant knows the workers that are there, or they may be young and in high school, whatever. That was the group that I would be leading. And I had to look in the mirror and say, what am I all about? And so that was the first time that I remember being self-aware. I was looking at these three offers and saying, where am I better fit? And if I'm going to be honest with myself, it's leading people. It's not going to be something that has a better title or a better image. It's actually going to be working in the back of a KFC restaurant. So my first job, the only person who wanted me to come home at night was our dog, because I was frying chicken in the back of a restaurant. I didn't even eat fried chicken. And, but I was learning to prepare it and do all that. And I did every single job in a restaurant. You know, I was the cashier. I was cleaning toilets. I was taking grease out to, you know, whatever it took. And I was learning what general management means, which means generally do anything that's needed and lead people on the way to do there. And so to develop that expertise, to be able to say, follow me, do that, to be the kind of leader that Howie had in the 3rd Ranger Battalion, to be able to say, look, this is what we need to do. So I would define it that we were when I finally had a group of restaurants, and I was responsible for the restaurants that were in Kansas City, that were owned by Pepsi, that were managed by KFC, and I had responsibility for that. We were an underperforming division. Our restaurants were dirty. We had incredibly high turnover rate, over 100% turnover rate every year. And so I did something, and you have to understand that this is pre-cell phone days. I had a phone, and it was one of those big bag phones that you might have seen in a museum somewhere, Lee, but it was about this big, and you plugged it into your cigarette lighter. You put a magnetic antenna on top of the car, you know, and that's the only reason I had a phone. So what I did was I closed our restaurants on a Saturday morning. I rented a movie theater, and I brought in all of the employees that we had within the city of Kansas City, and I brought them into a theater, and in the back I had these stacks of boxes. Everybody came in, and I introduced myself. I said, I'm the new area manager for Kansas City, and I have been in all of your restaurants. I've been there in day, I've been there at night, I've been through your drive-through, I've sat in your lobby. You don't know me, but I've been mystery shopping all of your restaurants, and our restaurants are pathetic. Said, you all look like hell. Your uniforms are dirty, torn, have holes in it. You fight. Many of you have been fired from other jobs, and most of you are likely to get fired from the one you're in right now. And I said, but I'd like to turn that around, because there's another way to look at this. And I think part of it is nobody's ever cared for you, and you know, you're underpaid. You ought to be making a whole lot more money. So I got cheers. First time I got any positive reaction when I said they ought to be making more money. So I said, my goal is that we will have the highest paid workforce within PepsiCo, within all the restaurants, Taco Bell, Pizza, KFC. We're going to have the highest paid workforce anywhere right here in Kansas City. Again, I got cheers. I said, but you're going to have to earn it. Our restaurants are going to be sparkly clean. We're going to treat our customers as they want to be. We're going to have the best food served in any restaurant. We're going to have people that just want to be in your restaurant. We're going to fill our lobbies. And that's how we're going to pay for you getting pay raises. And oh, by the way, what happens when you get fired? You go right down the street and you get a job at Popeyes or Church's or McDonald's or somewhere else. So you're not, and how much more money are you going to make?
Right, right.
I said, it's not going to get you where you need to be. So let's start focusing on taking care of business and taking care of you. And to begin that, I'm going to give you two things. So I had my management team pass out one of my business cards, and on the back of my business card, I taped a quarter on the back of every business card, because back then we still had payphones. And on the front of the business card had my box phone number. So I gave everybody a card, and I said, the next time that you're about to do something stupid, like get in a fight or cuss at your manager or treat a customer badly, go to the phone, call me. I'll come to you. We'll sit down, I'll listen to you, and we'll work through the issue. I said, next thing I'm going to give you, in the back of the room, there are boxes of uniforms. Every one of you is going to walk out here today with a new uniform. And what I want you to do is look really hard at that uniform, because that's the way every uniform you have from now on is going to look. Any grease, flour, anything, you wash it. You iron it. You look sharp. Anyway, we transformed, and we went from we were the dead last ranked division within KFC, and a year later we were number 7.
That's awesome.
Roger Enrico, who was chairman of Pepsi, actually invited our leadership team to a conference in New Orleans where he gave a leadership award to the leadership team. What I'm really proud of is that of the 12 restaurants we started with, 11 of the managers were still there a year later.
Wow.
The other one was in jail for selling drugs and through the drive-through window. So.
Steve, I gotta, as Howie would say, pull the thread on a couple of things here, specifically for the audience listening. Number one, that is an incredible story for multiple reasons. One, I love that you mentioned that it's KFC and PepsiCo, because again, while I did not serve directly in the military, a lot of people my age are transitioning out. And the first thing I hear is, I can't work at a place like that. And I always say, why not? Why can't you work in a place leading other people, right? I want to go back to the very beginning of what you were saying and talk about ego for a minute, because I think ego is something that is incredibly misunderstood, not just in people transitioning in the military, but in a greater sense. And I loved your definition. I want to repeat that, in the military, ego is what allows you to do what most people can't do. I love that definition, right? And I think that the military, in my experience, it's a paradox, because it is the most egoic group of people I've ever met, and at the same time, the most selfless group of people I've ever met. Those two things typically don't exist in the same place at the same time. And what you brought up that I really want the audience to take away is that you used both of those skills in a way, and you transferred them in a way that made not just you a tremendous leader to those people, but you made them believe in you. Follow me, right? You applied it perfectly. One of the themes that we talk about on the show constantly is that those transitioning out of the military do not know they possess that skill set. They don't realize it. They'll go to a job. They do not realize how to apply the teamwork, the leadership, the ego, if you will, right? And the selflessness to a civilian world. And the civilian world, adversely, is incredibly ill prepared for those skill sets. So it is almost a match made in heaven, as you just said. Going from worst to 7th, which is a win, right? Using the ego correctly, or really removing it from the situation and taking the bits and pieces of it that applied, right? And then to bring in the understanding of, as we talked earlier, we're a team. We're a bonded team. And if you can't survive in what we're shooting for, you won't be here. I love that you gave them the alternative, which is the same thing someplace else. But I just really want our listeners to hear that you said that ego is part of the job. So is the selflessness, applying it perfectly to any situation, whether it's KFC or something beyond. It's the ability to lead people that other people do not have. Howie, again, I want to throw that to you too, and just see if you had any thoughts on that, because Steve, I love that story. That's a phenomenal story.
It is absolutely phenomenal, and not surprising that Steve had that and created that experience for others. But Lee, I'll actually, I would say corporate America, maybe they're not only ill prepared for that, but I will tell you they are starving for it.
Right. That's a great way of looking at it.
Because from my personal experience, and this comes from having worked in government contracting for the better part of 8 years, and actually working with corporate America for 4 years at McChrystal Group, they are starving for high quality, effective leaders. And the fact that you were able to bring that kind of quality leadership, Steve, to that organization, and I want to echo exactly what Lee was saying, is, for our listening audience, you have a skill set, whether you want to admit it or not, or recognize it or not. I'm telling you, you have a skill set that will bring so much value to any organization that hires you. And you've got to have confidence in your competence to bring that kind of value to the organization and leverage it. The one thing that being in the military does, and I don't care which service you're in, if you've been in for 4 years or 34 years, you are going to learn how to discipline yourself, hold yourself accountable, hold others accountable, and you're probably going to be put in some form of a leadership role, whether you're a squad leader, a team chief, I don't care, whether you're in charge of 3 people or 103 people or 2,503 people. You have a skill set that will bring value to the organization, and I really thank you for sharing that story, Steve, because that's what our folks that are listening need to hear. That there are things that they can do that will make an organization better. So thank you for sharing that story, Steve.
If I can add one thing onto this too, because I want the audience to understand how this transcends, right? So we all know who Mark Cuban is. He's the owner of the Dallas Mavericks. He's a billionaire. He's on Shark Tank. I think he's written one book, and it was very short and very sweet. And he even said in the book, like, I don't want to be an author. I just want to help people. And he talks about taking over the Dallas Mavericks. So I'm equating these two stories right now, KFC restaurants and the Dallas Mavericks, because I want people to understand that this does not matter where you apply it, right? And in the book, he goes, when he took over the Dallas Mavericks, they sucked. They were horrible. You didn't want to go to a Dallas Mavericks game. So what did he do, Steve? He went to games. He sat in multiple places within the arena. He ordered food. He went from courtside to the nosebleeds all around the arena over the course of half a season. And he sat down all the employees. He had a built-in place to do it. He didn't have to rent out a movie theater. And he said, man, we suck at everything. And he goes, we're going to become the best organization in the NBA. Right? It's a mirror story, right? And obviously their story ended with them winning the NBA championship at one point, right? So great leaders are great leaders, right? If you're transitioning out of the military, you have been given a really great education in leadership, no matter really how you served or where you served. You can apply it to an NBA superstar team. You can apply it to KFC or anywhere in between, right? If I'm inspiring the audience, and Steve, you inspired me to tell this story, right? Like, know that when you're transitioning, you have a skill set that most people do not possess. Even if you don't believe that, I'm telling you that you do. I've been around military people most of my life. You all have it in some form. So, Steve, go ahead again. Now I got Howie and I telling stories. That's why I love these interviews, right? But go ahead if you want to comment on that, unless you want to move on, Howie.
Well, I'll say one thing. If I could have a prayer for leaders regarding ego, it might go something like this. Dear Lord, grant me the ego to protect myself while I lead others to do something really difficult. Because those challenges are out there.
Right.
And those underperforming organizations are out there. And ego is maybe a foundational element to the kind of confidence that people are going to need and the self-assurance that people are going to need to do those difficult things. Because otherwise we tell ourselves the negative stories.
Right.
And so we've got to be able to do that, but we also have to be able to keep it in check. So I think it's good. One other thing, and I don't know that this directly relates, but I've got this clock in the back of my head that's saying I may need to get this one out now. I want to touch on, you've said something twice, and that is, it's connecting. What is it that's unique about the military that we're not going to find in other industries? In 2018, I had a big shock that I had to figure out. I had to answer a question. And the question I asked myself was, what the hell am I doing with my life? I mean, I've been in 5 industries, including the military. So military, restaurants, corporate recruiting, hospitals, and then now in higher education. What am I doing with my life? And how does this make any sense? And that was not rhetorical. That was a legitimate question I was asking myself. What is it that makes sense in my life? And I answered it by looking backwards. So if I could tell your listeners, I didn't have the foresight to think of it ahead of time. Like, what do I want to do with my life? So I had to go back and figure it out. And here's what it is. Throughout my entire 41-year career since graduating from West Point, I have worked in organizations that were centered on core values and that were able to bring people together within a common set of values and express those in a way that could create high-performing organizations. Now, sometimes I was required to be the catalyst to bring them together towards that. And that's kind of really what I really like. I love going into underperforming organizations and bringing them together. But that's okay. But that's what the thread was. So if I now say, well, how does that manifest itself in my roots in the military? And here's what I think. For leaders, there's something that happens in the military that does not exist and has not existed for nearly 60 years in corporate America or in higher ed, in healthcare. And that is that, Howie, before you were a second lieutenant, you went to school to learn how to be a second lieutenant. And so you were trained, and you had a laboratory, you had a classroom, you had training exercises to practice being a leader. And then you got your first leadership assignment. And at some point, you were pulled out of your leadership assignment and sent back to school to learn how to take on more responsibility, learn how to be a staff officer, learn how to command at a higher level, learn how to lead bigger organizations. And then you were given a chance to practice that. And then you got your assignment. And a career in the military goes back and forth between learning to lead and leading. That doesn't exist anywhere else. And there are some rare companies that try to replicate that, but it's difficult and expensive. And so it just doesn't happen. So now, for everybody that's listening that's going to transition out, it's going to be incumbent that you understand if that doesn't exist, you've got to create it for yourself and be a lifelong learner. Absolutely. Don't interview and ask the company, what are you going to do to train and develop me? Rather, in your interview, go out and say, I'm a lifelong learner, and this is what I'm doing to develop myself, and here's how I'm going to prepare for higher level of leadership. If they've got a training program, great, add that on. It's not their responsibility to train and develop you. It's your responsibility to train and develop yourself.
Right.
If you take that on, you'll reach your goals. And then, I'm talking to CEOs and presidents, and as a coach, helping them to understand why it's so important to develop their leaders before they promote them.
And it's never been easier too. I think we have to say that. I mean, look, if you transition out of the military in the 80s or 90s, it's a different time period. If you're transitioning out today, you have unlimited resources online for leadership, for information. I mean, this podcast is meant to be a resource of information, but through LinkedIn Learning, Masterclass, YouTube, there's so many places you can go to educate yourself for little to no cost, to become better at what you do. Steve, one of the things I've been saying that's going to happen for a while, it's starting to happen, is that organizations may start creating their own education for their employees before you even come and get an interview, just so they can learn it. We're starting to see that now, as you said. But I agree with you 100%. The accountability is on you as the individual to search out and to grow. I was asked once when I was younger, I'm not quite sure I had the clairvoyancy to give this answer at the time, looking at my life now, but someone said, what do you think the pinnacle of life is? And I said, it's death. And they looked at me like, why? How is it death? I said, because you can learn to the day you die. You can grow until the day you die. So, man, I don't want my pinnacle to be on my 40s. I got half my life left over. It's just not how I looked at life. Right. I'll get back to everybody when I'm 70 or 80, if that's true or not. But the point is that, the opportunity to learn, and this is something I found as I got older, is I love learning. I love finding out new things. I love learning about leadership, and any leader worth their salt's going to tell you your education as a leader is never done. It never ends. That's an infinite game, for lack of a better word right now. Right. I have that saying, Howie's heard it before, good coaches know everything. Great coaches know they know nothing. You know what I mean? So that's a phenomenal story, as you put it there as well. And Howie, again, we're going to jump around on our questions a bit here today because, Steve, I'm going to be honest with you. I prefer the stories you're telling over a bunch of the questions, but we did do life in the military. Oh, go ahead. I see you got something.
I want to pause right now because if you use the word coaching or mentor again, without the context of this, I think that we run the risk of misleading.
Sure.
At least for my session with you. Okay. I think it's really important that we define the difference between a mentor and a coach.
Sure.
In a professional setting, because unfortunately, professional coaching, I'm sorry that they picked the word coach, because everybody has their own vision of what a coach is. So may I just give you one?
Please, yes, okay. Absolutely.
So I'm credentialed through the International Coaching Federation. I'm a professional and executive coach. And so I define the difference between mentoring and coaching by first going back to where the word mentor comes from. Do you know the origin of the word mentor?
No.
Okay. It comes from Greek mythology. Odysseus, if you ever had to read the Iliad and the Odyssey, in high school or college, Odysseus sets out for the Trojan War, the Peloponnesian Wars. And before he leaves, he gathers Penelope, his wife, and his son Agamemnon, and who I think is like 5 years old, and he's preparing to go off to war, and he kisses Penelope, and he takes his son to a family friend, and he said, "I'm going to be gone, and I don't know how long I'm going to be gone." Didn't know the gods were going to make it 20 years before he could get back, and to get through the Cyclops and the Sirens and all the other. But he says, "Would you raise my son? Teach him what you know." And so he gives his son to the family friend, and the family friend's name is mentor. Mentoring is sharing from one's own experience. It's teaching from that experience. So to be a mentor, I have to have done something that you want to do in your future to be a mentor. Coaches don't need that experience. Coaches, and where we have to differentiate between sports coaches is coaches don't say, "Hey, go do this. If you want to get here, go do this." That's not coaching. That's being directive. It's not professional coaching. So what's professional coaching? It's a partnership where the coach is asking questions. So it's actually the Socratic method, by asking somebody questions until they get this aha moment to go, that's what I need to do. And the questions don't begin with why. That gets people defensive. They're not yes or no questions. They're what or how questions. And so that's what we want to be able to do. So an effective coach is going to help elevate somebody to a higher level of both capability, excellence, and capacity, the ability to take on more, by asking questions and partnering in a way that helps that client grow. Is that okay?
Absolutely. I'd be a hypocrite if I didn't take your advice after I just said all that stuff about learning. Yeah, no, that is phenomenal information right there. And I agree with you. Look, in my world, and then we will get back on track. In my world, when I work with
we're not
coaches,
off track. We're not off track at all.
I agree with you.
We're only off track with one thing. I said Agamemnon. That's a different character. It was Telemachus was the son. Somebody listening read the Odyssey and is
I read it a long time ago, but I don't remember. So you got by me, Steve. So.
Right. No, Howie, I feel the same way. This is all invaluable. And when I work with coaches, using that word that they've been given, one of the things that I mentor them on, if you will, is that in my experience does not mean that it's going to equate to have somebody else learn. A common mistake that I find coaches make is they just believe people are motivated the same way they were motivated, right? And that's when you get the, why did you do it this way? Why did you do it that way? Because you're assuming your own experience is shared. If you're a 50-year-old coach and you're coaching a 16-year-old kid, your experience is not irrelevant, but it's not the same. Different time periods, different upbringings. So what I tell coaches to do is sit down with each player with 10 questions or more or less. How are you going to succeed this year? What steps will you take this year to become a better player? Put that accountability on them and then review it with them. Don't just do it once, right? So, like you said, I agree with you that, the aspect of being a coach is often misinterpreted by the people in that role about what it is you're supposed to do. Howie said this earlier about how what was the way you talked about hockey? It was
I think it's a conduit
right,
for help, for helping young men or young women or young, or girls and boys develop the skill sets they need to be successful later in their life. Right?
Now, Steve, to allude to what you said earlier about how in sync Howie and I are, and Howie, I don't know if I've ever told you this. My father would always tell me that hockey is your vehicle to grow as a human being, right? Which is, it's exactly the same thing that you're saying. And I've always viewed the game that way, as both the student and the teacher, and anything in between. So I'll tell you this, the mentor, the actual mentor in Greek mythology, deserves a lot more credit. I mean, it's amazing. You probably didn't realize at the time he would be known forever because of that, but I'm glad that you've done that. I'm going to add that into my speeches so people know it. And I've learned something here today. I already had it before that, Steve. But listen, we've been your time in the military. We've talked about your time out of the military. I'm very interested to learn more about what you're doing though as a chief people officer for the Texas Tech University system? Because when I read that, I kind of have an idea what that is, but I wanted to make sure that we got that out to our audience. So could you let them know how you're impacting culture, leader development, creating more effective teams in that entire system? Because that role sounds fascinating to me.
Sure. Well, Lee, I think I need to start out. I need to go back to 2010 when I left Cameron Brooks, the recruiting firm, to go work in a hospital, because that's actually the beginning point that led me to what I'm doing right now.
Right.
And it will lay the foundation for you of what that is. And so my best friend in a small town in Fredericksburg, Texas, which is a small German town in the hill country west of Austin. I was working for Cameron Brooks. We happened to be based in Fredericksburg. And my best friend was an anesthesiologist, head of the anesthesiology department at our hospital. He was on the board of trustees of that hospital. When the board decided to fire the CEO, get a new leader, they asked Mike if he would step off the board. And by the way, Howie knows Mike Williams. And
absolutely phenomenal man. Absolutely phenomenal man.
Great human being, great leader. The board asked Mike if he would step off the board temporarily, take on an interim role as CEO of the hospital, and help to begin the transformation of the hospital. But don't do too much, because we're going to do a nationwide search and find the next CEO. And so they did that. I was a recruiter. I helped people interview. I helped Mike interview for the role. We talked about it. He said, "Do you think I'd put my name in the hat as president?" We weighed out the pros and cons of that. I took on a coaching role with him, asking him, questions of what's your end state? Where do you want to, if you were the CEO, what would you want to do with the hospital? If that's your goal, who else do you think we could find that could do that? Anyway, he decides to put his name in the hat. He becomes the CEO. Then he calls me back and he says, "Would you come join me and be the chief operating officer at the hospital?" And I said, "Mike, why would I want to do that? I hate hospitals. I don't even like walking in them. And I've never worked in healthcare. Why would you want me to come?" And he said, "Steve, that's why." He said, "I need an outside set of eyes. I need a fresh perspective." I said, "What would you want me to do?" And he said, "And I don't care about the title. What do you want me to do?" And he said, "Well, what I want to do is build a culture based on values." I said, "Okay, well, I've done that." He said, "I want to start leader development programs. I want to start preparing our leaders on how to lead. They don't know what they're doing." I said, "Okay, I've done that." And he said, "And I want succession planning so that we don't have to do this forever. And we can pick the people who are going to run the hospital after us." I said, "Okay, I can do that." So I went over, but the first challenge, as we looked at it, the priorities were, we got to get the culture right. It begins with culture, because values define behaviors, how we treat each other. How I treat you, Lee, has more to do with my own value set than how you treat me. You may do something that I don't like, that I wished you hadn't done. How I respond has more to do with me, not you. And so we needed to get our values right. So to do that, I looked around, tried to find somebody to help us, and I found a woman named Ann Rhodes. Short story, Ann Rhodes was behind building the culture at Southwest Airlines. Ann came in from her home in Albuquerque. She helped us with that, and we were able to identify 5 core values, and we did it from the ground up. So instead of Mike and I sitting in his office and saying, "Hey, here are the values, everybody go live those," we actually flipped it around and we brought the team together and said, "What are your values? Who influenced you? What is it that drives your behaviors on your best day when you're treating people the way you want to treat them? What are those values?" That's what we built the culture around. So I need to tell you that, because my reputation was built basically on that. We started a methodology. The hospital went from the bottom third of all hospitals in the United States to winning the Malcolm Baldrige National Leadership Award in 2013 and the Malcolm Baldrige National Quality Award in 2014.
Oh, that is phenomenal.
Meanwhile, Mike Williams, the CEO, is starting to get statewide recognition, and Rick Perry, who was the governor of Texas at the time, appoints Mike to the board of regents for the University of North Texas education system in Texas, and there are 3 universities. And Mike's on the board when they decide to fire the president of the Health Science Center in Fort Worth. And they asked Mike if he'd temporarily step off the board while they do a nationwide search. You know the rest of the story. Mike ends up becoming the president. Mike calls me and says, would you consider moving from Hill Country Memorial Hospital to come join me at UNT Health Science Center? Why would I want to do that? I've never been in higher education. Well, it's because you have an outside experience. And the same story. What do you want me to do? Same story. Let's start with culture. Let's build leader development. Let's build succession planning, and we'll do that. And we were able, and that's when we met Howie and Jimmy, and they came in and we met their team and did some initial work. And you actually helped us on the communications piece. We worked with you. And then I had the opportunity to come to Texas Tech, a much larger system, more people, and I get a chance to live my purpose statement, which is to influence those who will transform the lives of others. That's what I do. And so the work initially at the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, now we've expanded it to the 5 universities that make up the Texas Tech system of universities, is really focused on the same thing, building values-based cultures. This is a guidebook on how to do that, that we wrote. So we build values-based cultures. We start development of people at all levels, understand that everybody can be a leader at some time, in their life, and that they probably are. The true test of a leader is not their business card. The true test is look over your shoulder. Is anybody following you? And so we focus on values-based cultures, people development, executive recruiting to hire leaders who will keep the values-based culture sustainable. And that's kind of the heart of the work. And then professional and executive coaching at different levels of the organization. We're about to start a coaching program for students, modeled after an institute at Rice University, the Door Institute for New Leaders. And so that's our newest thing that we're doing. But it's about developing people to improve capability, that is their ability to do excellent work, and capacity, their ability to take on more. And through that, we use a lot of different thought leaders, including Stan McChrystal and others, that have helped influence us on our journey.
Hey, Steve, you just prompted something in my mind and I just got to share this with you. All throughout my career, when I got to a certain level, right? But throughout the majority of my career, I always studied the leaders around me, and Lee's heard this before. I realize I view, even as a kid growing up, I view everything through a leadership lens, right? But one of the things I started doing as an officer, as an emerging leader, because I believe in everything you guys have been talking about, there has to be continuous learning, continuous development. You never stop until the day you stop breathing, right? But anyway, one of the things I did was I studied the leaders, especially in uniform around me. And when I found someone I thought was really doing it right, I looked for opportunities to get mentored by them, right? And so I was commanding the 112 Signal Battalion in the U.S. Army Special Operations Command. It was led by a 3-star at the time, General Schoolmaker, who, if anybody knows anything about the special ops arena, I mean, this man is a hero. He was on the Iranian hostage rescue mission that went bad. Peter Schoolmaker was on that mission, and he was in and out of the special ops community throughout the remainder of his career. Anyway, I had the privilege to have an office call with General Schoolmaker, and sir, I want to understand your command philosophy. How can I make myself a better leader? And so he started talking to me about leadership. And you got to remember, I think he's from Montana, right? He's a cowboy from Montana. And he says, Howie, I find that leadership's a lot like dealing with horses. You ever been around a horse? No, sir. I grew up in New Jersey, man. There weren't too many horses around where I grew up. He says, well, my experience is if you get out in front of a horse and you start pulling on its reins to get it to go move forward, it just puts its feet in the ground and it ain't going anywhere. He says the best thing you can do is just get out front and start walking. And a lot of times the horse will follow you just out of freaking curiosity, But the point is, you got to get out front and you got to lead, right? And then the soldiers will follow you hopefully not just out of curiosity. Hopefully it's because you set a great example as a leader, but you just reminded me of that. And I just wanted to share that. So Steve, this is exactly the kind of stuff I wanted to come out in this podcast. I really wanted to dig into your concept of a values-based culture, a values-based organization. Share your thoughts on that. I know it is absolutely your passion. I've seen you do it now multiple times in multiple organizations. So what I would like to shift though is, because I also know you are an incredibly well-read student of leadership and of organizational effectiveness and whatever can make an individual and an organization better. So what I would love for you to share with our audience is, what are some books that you have read that you have found incredibly valuable to you that you think would be worth sharing with our audience, and what are some of the lessons you learned from those books? Because I'm sure you're applying them in everything you do on a daily basis in whatever positions you've held or the position you're in right now. But I think that would be great, because listen, and you know this from our whole leadership development process in the military, and you mentioned some of it already. You have the experiential learning, right? The assignments you have, which teach you, that put you in situations and you develop yourself as a leader, right? Then you have the formal school. It's a triad, right? Think of a three-legged stool. So one leg of the stool is you have experiences. You work in jobs and you learn from that experience. The second is you go periodically throughout your career to a formal school to continue to develop yourself and your skill sets. But the third piece is your professional developmental reading program, right? What are you doing yourself to continue to learn and grow as a leader? And so that's what the kind of stuff I'd like to share with the audience right now, because I absolutely agree. I don't care what position you're in. I don't care what organization you're in uniform, out of uniform. I would encourage everybody continue to learn every day, whether you're reading books, listening to books, whatever it is. But if you could share some of that with the audience, I'd really appreciate it.
Sure. So we touched on it earlier about the importance of being a lifelong learner. Lee, as I recall, you're a Penn State grad, right?
No, my undergrad was at Montclair State. My graduate degree is at Drexel.
Oh, Drexel. I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah. No
so
worries.
Bob Morgan, who's
you had a lot of Penn State fans on the show. Though,
okay.
so don't
Bob Morgan, who's the president of Pivotal Moments, is a Penn State grad, and Ben, our producer, is a Penn State grad.
Right.
Yeah, Ben's
smiling. Ben's smiling right now as he listens.
All right, I'm sorry, and please.
It's okay. Okay. No worries at all.
But Drexel even better, because they're known for people who are really have great sechel, good head for numbers. So before I get into this, because I'm going to give you a list of books, but first I'm going to ask you to do a math problem. You have anything to write with there, Lee?
Yeah, I'm not good at math though, but I'll give it a shot.
Yeah, okay. Well, you can do this. Howie, you do it as well.
I've got my pen and paper right next to me, man.
Okay. By the way, you can also pull out your phone. You can pull out a calculator. You can get this. I just want to see who between the two of you gets the answer to this math problem first, or anybody else who is listening to this podcast.
I'll remind you, this can be edited, so no matter what happens.
So you may choose to. Here are the numbers. Just four numbers. Let's see who gives the answer first. Here are the numbers: 81. 730, 461, and 73. Okay, just to make sure you wrote it down. 81, 730, 461, 73. What's the answer?
What's the question?
Good. Yeah, I was wondering. Okay. Yeah, first we have to know what problem we're trying to solve, right? So another way to look at that number is 817-304-6173.
That's your phone number.
That's my cell phone number.
Yeah.
Okay. So anybody that's listening to this podcast is welcome to text me or call me.
Great.
And because to answer your question, and it's a good question, Howie, but it's hardly fair since I've got over 300 books behind me. So what problem are we trying to solve? Which is what you asked. What's the problem? What do I do with these numbers?
Yes.
So the importance of that is, in order for me to recommend a book, I'd like to know what challenge an individual has and that they're facing, And then if I can help from what I've read, because I've read all of these except for 3 books on the bottom shelf that are on my reading list, and one that I'm in the middle of right now, Measure What Matters by John Doerr, I've read them. So what's the problem? But I still want to take a stab at your answer, okay? And I want to do individual, I want to do team, and then you can guide me on what else, all right? So let's say that we have somebody that really wants to understand self-reflection. Who am I? What do I need to do? I'm a leader, but where am I focused? I recommend start with John Maxwell's book, The 5 Levels of Leadership. John Maxwell is a leadership author. He's written a lot of books. Some of them are self-promoting. But there's a key there's a grain of really something really good, I think, in each of his books. And I would, in the 5 levels of leadership, take somebody through a career, and they say, okay, level 1 leader is leader by job title. It's somebody says, yeah, I'm a leader. Read my job title. Look at the sign on my door. Look at the sign in front of the building. Yeah, cool, leader. My name's out there. And people follow because they're afraid not to. If I don't follow you, something bad will happen. You'll fire me, whatever else. And then there's the second level of leadership that is leadership by permission. The team gives permission because they really like you. They want to follow you. But that doesn't mean that you're getting the results. That comes in level 3. Maxwell calls it production, but that's where we're focused on results. So in addition to the team liking you and building relationships and building the team, you're a high productive team. Level 4 is developing others. It's people development. And level 5, Lee, ties directly to what you said. And he actually calls it pinnacle leadership. But the pinnacle may come at the end of a life. The pinnacle is something that I believe isn't something I can shoot for. It's not something I aspire to be a pinnacle leader. It's what others would say of me, because people follow me, or they would follow a pinnacle leader based on who they are and what they represent. Examples of that might be Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, Nelson Mandela, John Wooden, the basketball coach, Gandhi. People who throughout their life, they did things, and their ability to be humble, to be everything and nothing at the same time, is pretty incredible. So I would read the 5 levels of leadership and understand this. It's not a one-way journey. It's not like you go from 1 to 2 on up.
Right.
It's actually that at any given moment, I'm a different level of leader with different people on my one team. If somebody comes on board for the very first time, I've just hired a new person. In their mind, I'm a level 1 leader. They're only going to follow me because I'm the boss. And I have to begin getting to know them, building a relationship, caring for them to get to level 2. And then I have to get them in to where they're a high productive member of our team, because we have a new team with them on board. So I've got to go all through that. And then I have to start developing them to get to level 4. So I could be a level 4 leader with one person on my team and be a level 1 with somebody else on my team at the same time. That's where I would begin. For team development, and this is a simple book. The author is Pat Lencioni.
I knew you're going to mention him. I love him too.
The 5 dysfunctions of a team, but he's actually written 12 books.
Right.
And he's about to release his 13th. And he also, last October 30th, he released a new assessment called the Working Genius Assessment that breaks up work. So I'm going to refer to him, and one of the other thought leaders behind me is Jim Collins. His most famous book is Good to Great.
Right.
And Collins uses an analogy of a bus, and he says that leaders of great organizations believe it's more important to get the right people on the bus and the wrong people off the bus than to figure out where the bus is going. A great organization can change missions. A great organization can go through a pandemic without losing a step. The conditions can change, and she can still lead her team to greatness. And Lori Rice Spearman, who's current president of the Texas Tech University Health Sciences Center, is a great example of this. She is a phenomenal team leader. So Collins represents that. What does Lencioni's new model do? The Working Genius model. is it helps get the right people in the right seats on the bus. Sometimes somebody's underperforming because they're not in a position to use their strengths. They're a great person. They're aligned with our values, but they are being asked to do work that's not their genius, as defined by something they're very good at that also brings them joy and energy. So working genius is defined by those three things. A strength that brings joy and energy, that's a genius. So I would say that. And then Lee, I, like you, believe everything is foundationally, everything is built on trust. So I would recommend Stephen M.R. Covey's book, The Speed of Trust. So let me wrap that up with the 4 books that I just recommended. So 5 Levels of Leadership by John Maxwell. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team by Lencioni, which has a pyramid that trust is the first part. Good to Great by Jim Collins, and The Speed of Trust by Stephen M.R. Covey.
That is absolutely awesome. And I highly, highly encourage our audience to invest the time and effort to read these books or others as you continue to develop yourself as an individual, as a leader, whatever it is you want to become. So Steve, I'm going to get to probably the most important question of this recording. Literally the most important question of this recording. So, but I'm going to give a little context first, right? So as Steve has alluded to, and we mentioned a little earlier, I was working with the McChrystal Group at, back in the 2015 to 2019 timeframe. And I was working for one of my best friends in the world, a retired Lieutenant General Jimmy Huggins, who retired as the Army G3. Jimmy commanded the 82nd Airborne Division, commanded a brigade in the 82nd, a battalion in the 82nd, a company in the 82nd, has been through every major combat operation in present day. When he was active, he was the most deployed officer in the Army at the time. So Jimmy and I went to the Dallas-Fort Worth area, and we got a chance to meet and work with Steve. And as we were there doing our thing and interviewing folks in leadership,
I think I know where you're headed. Does this have anything to do with chocolate covered almonds?
It absolutely does, Steve. And so we were doing our thing, and Steve is just look. You can tell from this interview that this man is nothing but class in everything he does. Everything the way he dresses, the way he carries himself, his interactions with people. Look, I'll tell you another quick one, right? And then I'll get to this other story. Steve, there were so many things I learned from this man in that 3 or 4 day period when we walked the campus of the Health Science Center at University of North Texas. And one of them was, he did a it's like when you bring new people in, it's escaping me now, but when you bring new people into organization, you have kind of a welcome meeting and
orientation.
Kind of an orientation, right? And I sat in on an orientation that Steve's team did, and I got to watch Steve in the orientation. And one thing that he challenged every new member of that University of North Texas Health Science Center team to do was, when you're walking, and I don't care whether you're walking inside the building, outside the building, we have a tendency, and a lot of us do this, we walk past someone and we'll just turn away, put our head down, and for whatever reason, we don't acknowledge that other person. And Steve challenged everybody that when you are coming up on someone, you look them straight in the eye and you say hello and you ask them how they're doing. How's your day going? And I watched Steve do this for the 3 or 4 days I spent. I watched Steve do this, and I started doing it myself. And it is amazing, one, how good it makes you feel and how good it makes someone else feel. But anyway, so we're doing our thing with Steve and his team. And Steve invites us to his home. Now, he commuted back and forth from the Hill Country, from Fredericksburg, Texas, to Dallas-Fort Worth area. And so he had a place there, and he invited Jim and I back to his place. And Steve is an absolute connoisseur of whiskey and bourbon. And so Steve brought out, I couldn't even tell you which ones, but a number of bottles of probably some of the best Scotch and bourbon I'll have ever put my lips to. And I'm not much of a drinker. So he gave us the history of each one, and he invited us to taste different ones. And then he also put out a bowl of chocolate almonds, because he said, when you drink a certain liquor, it will actually increase the flavor or something like that. Well, needless to say, all I did was eat the freaking chocolate almonds, man, because I couldn't drink. I did not appreciate the quality of the liquor he put in front of me. But Steve, so the question is, I know you are a bourbon and a whiskey connoisseur, so please suggest for our audience the top 3 bourbons and whiskeys that you would recommend for their consumption.
Okay. All right. I'll do this. So first of all, I want everybody to understand whiskey is the generic term for any cereal grain that's been distilled. If Chex can make it into a cereal, then somebody else can distill that grain and make it into whiskey. So bourbon is a whiskey and Scotch is a whiskey. So I'll stick with, I'll answer your question. I'll give you 3 whiskeys, and I'll give you one from the United States, because to be called bourbon has to be distilled in the US.
Right.
To be called Scotch, it has to be distilled in Scotland.
Right.
Okay. So we'll do that. And then we'll go to one of the oldest types of whiskey that was ever distilled in America. In fact, I'll start with that. And so rye whiskey is what George Washington and Thomas Jefferson distilled. And there is a rye whiskey that the brand most people have heard of. So Crown Royal, and so that wouldn't be any surprise to anybody, in the little purple bag or whatever. But there's a different Crown Royal, and it's in a white box, and it's Crown Royal Northern Harvest Rye. Comes from the northern regions of Canada, and because of the cold and the temperature, the rye it actually makes the whiskey spicier. It's not as sweet. Tastes like rye bread when you drink it. And for those people who want to ease themselves into whiskey because they say, I don't like whiskey, I say start there, mix it with ginger ale. One of the oldest highballs cocktails is just rye and ginger. So take a little bit of rye, mix it with some ginger ale, introduce yourself to the flavor, get where you can just taste the whiskey by itself, and you'll get a real appreciation of what a good whiskey is. And that one's really smooth, really good. All right. Commercially available, easy to find. Just buy the white box of Crown Royal and you'll have that. All right. Bourbon. Made in America. The predominant grain, unlike rye, the predominant grain is corn. So to be called bourbon, 51% of the grain has to come from corn, has to be made in the United States, not in Kentucky. In fact, I'm going to bring you to Texas. There's a great brand. In fact, everything that they sell has won awards. It's from Waco, Texas, of all places, home of Baylor University. Okay. And the original distillery was under the 18th Street Bridge in Waco. I know the founder, the original founder, who got fired because he pointed a gun at the chair of the board of trustees later, but the board of directors. But that's another story that I won't get to tonight. Okay, but just buy the bourbon. So it's Balcones, Balcones, Balcones pot stilled bourbon. It is phenomenal. There's another one in Texas called Garrison Brothers, actually from Fredericksburg. But it's overpriced, but it's really good. If you want to get Garrison Brothers bourbon, that's good. Let's go to Scotland. And I'm trying to give things that people like the Crown Royal. People have heard of Crown Royal, but I bet very few of you have ever tried the Northern Harvest Rye. Try it. Balcones, you're going to have to look for it, but it's not that hard to find. The next one is a Scotch. And this is for everybody like Howie who says, well, I don't like Scotch. You just haven't had the right Scotch. They're over.
Well, I do now. But back then it was chocolate almonds, man.
All right. So I'm going to spell this one. It's Glen Dronach. So capital Glen, Glen like a lake. And then Dronach, capital Dronach. Splurge and get the 18-year-old that's in aged twice in an oak cask and then in a tawny port cask. The complexity of the whiskey is phenomenal. if somebody was going to try something and say, I want to see if I like Scotch, you won't be sorry to try the 18-year-old Glendronach. It's a heck of a great whiskey.
Just out of curiosity, Steve, just what kind of price range are we talking about for that?
That one's going to run about 110, 120.
Okay.
But if you want to go less, then I'll give you another one that would be in the $50 to $60 range. That if I was going to own one bottle of Scotch, it might be this one. Glenfiddich. A lot of people have heard of it. It's in the triangular bottle, but this is a particular one. The 15-year-old, Glenfiddich 15-year-old, not the green bottle, which is 12, not the expensive 21 or 25. Get the 15-year-old, and it's called the Solera cask, and it is phenomenal. And that is a great introduction at a lower price point. But if you can splurge for the Glendronach 18, go for it. Cool. There you go. By the way, I have as many bottles of whiskey as I have books.
I know you do.
And more people text me because, hey, I'm in my favorite package store. I'm in a liquor store, and hey, and they'll send me a picture. What do I buy? So I ask, well, what problem are you trying to solve? What is it you want to do with this? What flavor are you looking for? So I'll even take a beer or a wine drinker, and if they said, I want to try a whiskey, I'll say, tell me about what's your favorite beer? Because malt whiskey and comes from the same grain that makes ale. If somebody really likes an IPA, they probably don't like Scotch. But if somebody likes amber ales and malt and malty, somebody likes a Guinness or something, they're going to love whiskey. They just have to find the right whiskey.
Yeah. Cool.
There it is.
Cool.
There's my 2 cents.
Great advice, man.
Steve, I'll tell you, no matter what, people are leaving this episode with some education today. They might have got something they didn't ask for. My wife and I, when my wife was at Lakenheath, we got to go to Edinburgh, Scotland, and go to some of the distilleries, and man, was it smooth when you got it there. Dangerously smooth. In fact, I don't remember which one it was. There's probably a reason for that. But we had some unbelievably smooth Scotch when we were there. So before we move on, we're talking about books. It's been commonplace here that I create book titles for our guests. Now, I know you said you had a book, correct? You've written a book already?
I've written a leadership guide.
The leadership guide, right? So okay. I've come up with a title here based on our conversation. Howie always loves this. But your book title, by me, is From Hot Food to Human Potential by Steve Sosland. That's your book title. That's what we're doing today.
I love it.
One of these days, that's going to be taken. Hot food,
writing that down.
The human potential.
Well, Steve, I want an autographed copy of that one when you write it, man.
Yeah. By the way, Howie, I'm going to co-author all these books with them. So just because my name's there, but no, Steve, we're going to move on to our final question here, which is an important one for our audience, but it's a mainstay of the show. As you know, Pivotal Moments seeks to strengthen mental fitness worldwide. That's the mission of the group. So we want to know, how do you define it? How do you define mental fitness? And what do you do to strengthen your own mental fitness? If you haven't already taken that from this episode, this is another opportunity to learn.
So my definition of mental fitness is the ability to hone oneself spiritually and mentally and holistically in a way that provides the resilience needed to overcome adversity. And it can be learned. It certainly will be challenged. And, if resilience, and there are a lot of definitions, but if resilience is the ability to get through our crucible moments in life, right? Where we fall off of our values, or we make a mistake, or we fail in our performance, and that can be personal or professional. And how do we do that? We've got to be able to have tools that help us to be able to do that. And I will tell you one. I'll give you one that I don't think you'll hear often, and it's a tool that my wife Kelly and I developed together. And this was when our youngest daughter was in our senior in high school, and we knew we were going to be empty nesters. Yet we'd each developed our lives, Kelly around her career and our daughters, me more about my career than our daughters, although I knew I had a problem when I was traveling so much that I knew the names of skycaps and their kids more than my kids' teachers. It was embarrassing. But simultaneously, 3 of our closest couple friends had either recently or were about to get a divorce. And so Kelly and I we just said, we don't want to do this, but it looks like we're on the same trajectory. If somebody was going to say we've grown apart or we don't have things in common, we could have said that. We just didn't want to. So we started developing, and this is the answer to your question, we started developing positive habits. The first was that every morning that I was home, not traveling, we would go out on the back porch and we would have a cup of coffee together, and Becca wasn't allowed to come out and join us. She knew that was our personal time. Later, not everybody drinks alcohol, we do. Later, we added cocktails. So at night, we would have a cocktail on the back porch. And then we looked in our backyard and saw space, and we said, let's buy a hot tub. And this is the most important thing. One of the books back here has a story about what I'm telling you. The author asked me how we got through this, and I told him he wrote it in a book titled Upstream by Dan Heath. But we bought this hot tub, and the most magical thing happened to us. And that is that we made the commitment that whenever we would get into the hot tub, that we would create a safe space for conversation, and we could say anything to each other in that hot tub and not take it personally. That no matter how hard it was, no matter how poorly I had behaved, no matter what it was, we could talk about it in the hot tub and we would get through it, and we wouldn't leave the hot tub until we had worked through it, and we would not hold it against each other afterwards. We set ground rules and we created a safe space. These were positive habits. And I'm specifically talking about in a relationship. We created positive moments that would help us to be able to get through the tough times and be able to build that mental fitness that would help us be resilient in our tough times. And later, 5 years ago, we actually built a home on the land that we had purchased 20 years ago in the hill country. The first thing we built before the house was a pad for the hot tub, and we bought a new hot tub and we put it there. We were in the hot tub before we were in the house. That's how important it was. And the hot tub is a metaphor. This could be anything. It could be anywhere. But it's how do we create a safe space so that we can deal with the tough times in our life. Now, I have a personal safe space, any river. So I do 3 things for hobbies. I read, I drink whiskey, I collect whiskey and share it with friends more than I drink it. And I kayak on Texas rivers. I can get into a kayak on a river, and even if I'm only on the river for an hour, I will discharge and recharge. So whatever was in me goes away, and then I'm ready to go and attack, life again. And I was there 2 days ago. I was on the river. And sometimes I do it with friends. Sometimes I do it with Kelly. Often I do it by myself. So I've created a safe place for me. And together, Kelly and I have created a safe space. And those things matter. And that's how I do it.
What a phenomenal answer.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal answer. Steve, look, I just want to thank you again from the absolute bottom of my heart for taking the time to be with us today. This was everything I wanted it to be and so much more. I just think the world of you. I'll tell you, I'm just trying to figure out how we're going to spend more time together, right? Because I know you're in Texas, I'm in Northern Virginia, but somehow, somewhere, some way, we're going to find time to get together again, personally, in person. And I was actually kind of hoping you're going to say when you're in the river, you were fly fishing, because I'm actually working to outfit myself with a whole bunch of fly fishing gear and say, I will make a trip out there and fly fish with you. But maybe I need to start kayaking.
We need to start another podcast, just Stories with Steve. It'd be a 5-part miniseries. And, I don't want people to take away just the hot tub, man, but I wish you told that story before I came up with my book name. It could have been Hot Food to Human Potential to the Hot Tub. Even better name. No, Steve, it's been a real pleasure. Like, it's been one of my favorite episodes so far. Just so many great takeaways from this episode. Not even just for people transitioning from military to civilian life. And that's really the key, right? We've covered a lot in this episode, and I wish it could continue, to be perfectly honest with you.
Yeah.
Well, Lee, I would ask you in your show notes, put Miracle, Kurt Russell's best role by far when he played Herb Brooks. I think everybody who is an aspiring leader should watch that. You and I have watched it multiple times, I know. And
I've studied that team, Steve. I've studied that team in depth. Yeah.
And to your wife and to Howie and to all of those that watch that are transitioning from the military, I want to say something that most people would say, thanks for your service. We would respond, it was an honor. I want to say thanks for volunteering, because everybody that will watch this that's currently in uniform has volunteered, some multiple times, and for different things. And not everybody volunteers. Not everybody is willing to put themselves out there. And we've talked about a lot of things today, but that hopefully will be tools that people can use along the way, hopefully. And please don't edit out my cell phone number. I'm serious. I don't think many people will take me up on it, but those who do, I will give them my all and my commitment. They volunteered to serve, and I feel obligated to serve them. So Lee, thanks. Howie, great to see him, spend time with you. Ben, behind the scenes, really appreciate this opportunity. Thanks.
Cool. I think the pleasure was all ours, sir. And we appreciate you being here. We'll have to have you on again. With that said, I do have to tell everybody you've been listening to Life After the Military, which is powered by the nonprofit Pivotal Moments, and you can learn more about that organization at pivotalmoments.org. Check out lots of more inspirational content, education, or if you'd like to donate. For Steve Sosland, Howie Cohen, I'm Lee Elias. Thanks so much for joining us, and make sure you keep an eye out for more episodes soon, wherever podcasts can be heard. Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.